The interview is me, the interviewer, Michael Hoffman. Well, for the record, we need you to just say which war you fought in.
We fought in World War II.
And your rank was?
In the Central Pacific Theater of War.
And what time you served?
I served from 1942 to 1945, after the war.
Okay, so you can start off with about the time when you enlisted for the Army. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted in the Marine Corps in the summer of 1942.
Well, where were you living
for
at?
the duration of the national emergency.
Yeah, where were you living at the time?
At the time I was living in Bristol, Connecticut. I resided there and graduated from high school there in Bristol. And right after I graduated, I joined the Marine Corps and enlisted in that summer.
And why did you join?
Well, probably like thousands of other American young teenagers, that we were enraged at the fact that we were attacked secretly and attacked by the Empire of Japan, and we all wanted to get in and defeat the enemy, and because we'd all lived in this country, we thought a lot of it, and we thought it was our duty to protect it, protect our freedom.
Did you recall your first days in the service? Well, like what it felt like?
Well, of course, when you enlist, you go in the Marine Corps. You go to the recruit depot in Parris Island, South Carolina, and at the time we had 8 weeks of basic training. Now they have 12 weeks of basic training, but they were in a hurry to get Marines because they'd already suffered losses at Guadalcanal, and the Marines were getting pretty well depleted, so they had to get Marines into action as soon as possible, so we only had 8 weeks training. And from there I went to New River, North Carolina, Camp Lejeune, and went to quartermaster school. That's in the service and supply logistics of the Corps. And after that, transferred to Camp Pendleton in California, and joined the rest of the division out there. Half of the 4th Division was recruited and trained out at Camp Elliott. And then we left San Diego, first part of 43, January 43, I think, to go to Marshall Islands.
Yeah.
That's about the first year of it, and then we went directly into the Marshall Islands for combat. The 1st Division to ever do so. Most of them left from Australia or Hawaii or somewhere else. We went directly. Our rest base was in Maui, in the Hawaiian Islands. And from there we resupplied, got replacements, and went to the Carolines and fought the battles of Saipan and Tinian. Tinian was where the air base was made to bomb Japan. And then we went back to Maui for more replacements, resupplied, and Then we went to Iwo Jima, which was a small volcanic island that had to be taken to serve as a forward base for our Air Force, so that the bombers coming back to Tinian, if they were shot up or low on fuel, they'd have to ditch in the ocean. So Iwo Jima was a base where they could save the aircraft and a lot of airmen's lives. So that was the reason that was taken at a high cost of Marine and Navy personnel.
Yeah. So do you remember anything else about your training experience, about like the instructors or how hard it was?
Well, at first when you get to boot camp, you may feel homesick, but they don't give you time to get homesick. They're pretty rough on you, but you learn to be a Marine. You learn to work together. Marines never let their buddies down. You look behind all the Marines that came before you and the sacrifices they made, and it gives you a lot of pride to belong to such an outfit. And I can remember the name of my sergeant in boot camp was Sergeant Raymond Sizemore, and I had quite a few buddies. Can't remember all their names, but I can remember the faces and the experiences that we had. I remember my Lieutenant Robert Wegman. I remember Captain Jesse Massey. And our colonel was Colonel Fondell. And of course now, I'm 82, and probably a lot of those that were teenagers that joined up after in the war, or we're all in our 80s now, so it's kind of hard to remember all the experiences that you had. But I like to remember the good times I had, and the good friendships, the good buddies I had.
So you got through the training pretty easily then?
Yeah, yeah. I made a few mistakes, but I got out of them all right.
So after the training, you said you went straight to the Marshall Islands?
Yeah, yeah. We had more advanced training at Camp Lejeune, and we went west. We went west through the southern part of the country, through Texas and New Mexico, out to California. So we saw some of the country, and when the trains went through some of the towns, the people would come out and welcome you, and the girls would give you cookies and kiss you and say good luck and all that. It was nice. And then spent some time at Camp Pendleton, and I had some cousins that lived out around Los Angeles, so I got a chance to see some cousins that I'd never met before. And some of my weekends on Liberty, I could go up and visit with them, and they'd show me around, and then they'd take me back to the bus so I could get back to the base on time.
Do you remember what it was like when you left the training for the Marshall Islands? Like how different that was?
Well, as I say, we were all green. It was our first engagement against the enemy, and it didn't take too long to take those islands, but we lost a few men, and I can remember the stretchers going by when it was raining, and the stretchers were going by, and all I could see sticking out on the end of the stretcher was a pair of boondockers, just like mine, and I thought, there but for the grace of God goes Bill Wood. And then we had to, our company had to stay there and garrison the islands for about 30 days until the Army could come in and take over. And then we went back to Mali, of course.
Did you have a certain job or assignment?
Yeah, our job as service and supply was to load the landing craft and get the supplies to the beach. Water and ammunition first, and then rations and things that you could get. And as soon as the first or second wave got enough ground so we could set up a supply dump, and then be there to resupply the forward Marines. Sometimes shells would be hitting around the supply dump, but I don't know if you ever get used to it. You get used to it. The time they hit, it's too late to duck.
Do you have any experiences during these that was like more memorable?
Well, I remembered on island of Tinian, we had to move our supply dump from the beaches from close to the coast inland some, and we were in the process of getting it done, and this lieutenant from some other outfit that I know, he came in and he wanted the hospital rations were better. They had bacon and they had fruit and juices and so forth for hospital rations. And he wanted to come down, and he came down in his Jeep with a driver, and he recognized me and he said, how about, Woodsy, he says, how about putting a case of those hospital rations into my Jeep? And I says, well, I says, how about you getting a case of that ash eye beer and dropping it off here? He laughed. So that was one. And at that same island, I got a case of dengue fever. And it's what the natives there call bone-breaking disease. Every bone in your body aches and hurts. And I didn't want to turn into the hospital, but I found a place and threw a poncho over me, and I slept, and I sweated and chilled and sweat. And I don't know how long I was there. When I woke up, I could smell the coffee in a pot, and I went over and got some coffee and went on. Never bothered me much after that. So that was the main trouble I had. I was fortunate I never got wounded or hit. One operation, going back from one operation, a lot of us got dysentery, and had to check into the hospital for that, because even after you're over it, you're a carrier of it. Well, I was in the hospital for a while with that. Jima was a rough one. We went in, we were just below airport number 1 there, and it took several days to get above that. It took 4 days to get Mount Surbachi taken, where the flag was raised, and we lost a lot of men there. One of the ones that was lost, I went up through a cemetery where they were burying them, and I saw one of my friends from Bristol, who was he was younger than I was, but he was in grade school here with my youngest sister, and he was killed about the last day that we were on the island. We had a picture of we were on Liberty. We had a picture taken, the two of us, and we sent it home. And after he was killed, I wrote a letter to his mother and told her, and she had made an enlargement of that picture, and so she sent me an enlargement of a picture of him and I before we went to Iwo Jima.
So, you never were taken prisoner or anything like that?
No, I wasn't taken prisoner. On Saipan, we had to go down and had a burial detail, and I had to go down and guard the prisoners. We had to some of the natives there and the prisoners digging graves, and I had to go down and guard them. You do whatever you're ordered to do, you know.
Were you ever awarded any medals or citations?
Well, like I told you the other day, we had 2 presidential unit citations, the 4th Division did. And of course I had the Asiatic Pacific Theater of War with 3 stars. And American Theater of War, Good Conduct Medal. I guess that's about it.
Yeah.
A lot of people, they got medals. A lot of them that didn't get medals deserved them, I can tell you that right now.
One
One of the greatest services is by the Navy corpsmen. They go in without weapons, they go in with canteens of water, sulfur drugs, and blood plasma to save their lives till they can be evacuated back to the hospital ship. And no Marine can say a word against Navy corpsmen there. They've saved a lot of lives.
And while you were away, were you able to keep in touch with your family?
Oh yes, I wrote back and forth to my father, my mother, and my sisters, and they sent me back letters. But not too many out of the family communicated with me.
When you were living during the war, what was the food like?
The food?
Yeah.
Well, the food was good. Yeah. Wasn't like home cooking, but it was good. Yeah. Most of the time. You got used to it, and when you're hungry, anything tastes good. Of course, sea rations the first few days till the cooks and bakers get operating. The first days in operation, the sea rations wasn't too much, but you weren't worried too much about eating. Water was the main thing, and water out of a canteen doesn't taste. It's not like fresh water. It's hard to. But they had units that come in, water sterilization units, that could take seawater and take the salt out of it and sterilize the water and give that fresh drinking water.
So, do you have plenty of supplies?
Yeah. Well, me being in the supply op, they had what they call the table of basic allowances for a 30-day operation. But we always padded it. We always put in more than actually what they figured you would need for 30 days. And then resupply was pretty good.
Did you ever feel any pressure or stress?
No, I don't think I was under you. You're scared, you're afraid, but when you see some of your what some of your buddies have to go through, you realize that you're better off than a lot of them.
Was there a chance for like any entertainment during like the off period?
Oh yeah, we had movies, and when we were at, especially out in Camp Pendleton, we had Liberty, where we could go either, in bus and go into either Los Angeles or San Diego or some of the towns there, do a little sightseeing. Like I said, I could visit with my relative there. And then when we were on the rest base at Maui, we had entertainment. We had movies at night, and we had Liberty, every week or so. And but there wasn't much there. At the time, Maui was just was mostly rural, sugarcane fields and pineapple fields, and not like they say it is today with golf courses and entertainment. But we had movies was the main thing we had. I had a friend of mine from home here in Bristol who was in the Navy. He was a Navy pilot, and he heard from his father that I was on Maui, and so he flew over to Maui and looked me up one time. I had a visit with him. He took me out to the airfield, showed me his plane, and so that was a good boost to see somebody from home. And then I had a week R&R where we could go over to Oahu, Maui, and I had a cousin that was stationed there at the United States sub base there, and so I went out to the sub base and went to the guard check and told him who he wanted to see, and he came down and visited, and he said he was going to try to get a day or two off while I was there, so he did, got time off. So we went out around Oahu, and we got entertained a little bit. And so that was a nice break. And that was before Iwo Jima. And he said, told him where we've been doing. And so he says, I said, we're going out again. And he said, I guess this is going to be a big one because I can see the ships. I can see the ships in the harbor coming in, and it's going to be a big one. And it was quite an armada.
recall any particularly humorous or unusual event?
Any unusual events?
Yeah.
Let's see. I was on guard duty one night, and I looked out in the road, and there was a horse out there. Saddle, no rider. And so I went out and gathered him up. Instead of walking around the guard post, I rode around on the horse. Then I went to the sergeant of the guards, and I says, what do you want me to do with this horse I found? And I don't know, call the officer today. So the officer today was Lieutenant Wegman. He says, where'd you find him? I says, out in the road. He said, you know anything about horses? I says, yeah. He says, what do you think you ought to do? I says, first thing I think you ought to unsaddle him and tie him up there and give him some water. Okay, he said. And I said, I think in the morning you should probably call some of these places that rent out saddle horses for rides, you know, call them a riding stable. Because I says, probably, some Marine probably went out and rented a horse, ride for a couple hours, and he drove him halfway back to camp and let him loose. So that's what happened. And this fella came the next day and get the horse, and the lieutenant said he wants to see the guy that took care of the horse, so he came down, thanked me. So that's quite unusual, I would say.
So, what did you think of the officers or the fellow soldiers?
Oh, I respected all of them. I had good officers, and I had no complaints. They treated, well, they treated me just like everybody else. As long as you did your job, and get into trouble, you wouldn't have any trouble with them. I didn't find that way. I found that they all treated you. They were tough, stern, but they were fair. Anyone that I ever had. Of course, some of the officers, what you call 30-day wonders, they were just about the same age as we were, teenagers, but just that they went through officer training school, and some of the old sergeants that had been in the Corps for years before, they kind of took over and helped the young officers, I think. Some of them looked at them like they were 90-day wonders, but they had to salute them, they had to respect them. And of course, when you're on liberty around in uniform, when you're out on the islands, the officers usually take off their insignias so that the enemy won't pick out the officers to kill first.
Do you recall the day your service ended?
Yep. December the 4th, 1945. The European War was over before the Pacific War, and they were going to come over and some of them were going to be transferred from Europe over to the Pacific Theater War, but Harry Truman decided that he had enough, and he dropped the atomic bomb, and that ended it. So the war actually was over on 15th of August of 1945, and we were still over on we were still over. I was on Maui. A lot of us were overseas, but we had enough points to come home. And as soon as they could find shipping to get us back, I was shipped home on an aircraft carrier, which they converted the hangar decks. They put in bunks in the hangar decks so that they could convert it like to a troop carrier. I came back to San Diego and Camp Pendleton, and then we shipped back by train again, back to the East Coast. I went to Bainbridge, Maryland, and that's where I was discharged from in December. So all these pictures you see of when the war was over and the ships were coming home and everybody was getting greeted, there was none of us but that for us, because the war had been over in about 6 months. And, we were just anxious to get home.
What did you do in the days and weeks afterward?
Well, I was fortunate. I came home and first I had a sister in college out in Rhode Island. So my mother and I and my younger sister went out to visit her. And then I came home. I was in business with my father. And so after the war, he gave me a percentage of the business, and I worked in the feed business that we had in Bristol. And so I went right back to work, had my job. I didn't have to worry about finding a job. And we got, at that time we got $300 muster and out pay when we got out of the service. So that was a little spending money. I didn't have a car. I had to work for a while until I could afford a second-hand car. And then I had buddies that came home that one especially was in the Navy, and we got together and went out quite a lot together. And, we had some good times in 45, and then in 1949 I got married. We were married 56 years.
Did you make any close friendships while you were in the service?
Oh yeah. There was one fellow from Tucson, Arizona, named Sam Stinson. He was a good buddy. I never saw him again after the war. Another one was Jerry Traver. He lived up in Linton, North Dakota, and we communicated by mail a couple of times. Another one was think of her name. He's from Battle Creek, Michigan. He and his wife came out to see me one year. And another fellow, I can't remember where he's from, was Glenn Vosick. He came out to see me one year. And then another buddy from Knoxville, Tennessee, Bill Middleton. He was a good buddy of mine. We called him Slim Middleton. And he came up to Connecticut to see me one time. And another buddy I had that I had never seen or heard from was Sidney Ryan. He was from Louisiana, Pelican, Louisiana. Well, there was quite a few buddies I had. Others too numerous to mention.
Did you continue? ever continue any of these friend relationships?
I tried, as I say, um, the one from Battle Creek was Kurt Jennings, his name was. And as I say, on my honeymoon, I was out through Canada and out through there, and I stopped to visit him. And he put me up that night, and then we sent Christmas cards to each other, and he came out here one summer with his wife to visit me. And Bill Middleton, he had a job where he had a business contact in Milford, Connecticut. And while he was up here, he came to visit me. But you lose contact, and when a friend of mine was going out to Arizona, he was going out, and I said, would you try to look up this friend of mine, Sam Stinson? And he said, you. So he came back, and he said he went, and he had just passed away, but his wife and daughter were there. Wife and daughter were there, and he said they appreciated me trying to contact him. Although I couldn't go to Arizona, I wanted to see if he was still around and I could write to him. But he just passed away, so. And I'm afraid that's a lot true with a lot of others that I haven't heard from in a long time.
Did you join a veterans organization?
Yeah, I belong to the American Legion. I belong to the Veterans of Foreign Wars. I belong to the Iwo Jima Survivors Association.
Are there any activities involved with the association?
Well, at the present time, I'm president of the Iwo Jima Survivors Association. And I've been served over a year. It's a 3-year deal, and I served 1 year. I had 2 more years to serve there. And, so that's kind of keeping me kind of busy now. But so I get the American Legion magazine and VFW magazine. And Leatherneck magazine. It's a magazine in the Marine Corps. Leatherneck magazine. That has some good articles in it. Sometimes they have a few good humorous jokes in there too.
Do you ever have any reunion?
I went to one. The reunion of the 4th Marine Division that we had in Hartford a couple of years ago. But that's the only one. There's probably a couple others I should have got to. But sometime the next one is out in California. And I had one in Texas. So you really got to, of course, a lot of those years I was working. I couldn't take time off to go to a reunion. I couldn't financially go to them. But the one in Hartford I went to. I had some work to do on that one. And then we have a reunion of Iwo Jima Survivors, our group here. And I've been to several of those. And the survivors, we have a summer picnic. It has been held on the Sunday closest to VJ Day, but last couple of years they haven't had it at that time. They've had it late in September after Labor Day. They have it down by the shore. But we have summer picnics and reunions.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Uh, well, as I've told other people, I think one of the biggest improvements with, since World War II, forgetting all the newer weapons and everything, I think one of the biggest things is the helicopter, which they didn't start using helicopters much until the Korean War. In a helicopter, they can land Marines in. They don't have to hit the beach. They can land in, and they can get the wounded out faster. Instead of getting the wounded to the beach and then into a landing craft and then out to the ship, they can take the wounded right out and they can get medical care a lot sooner. And I think that's one of the biggest improvements in my mind. Although there's been a lot of improvements in weaponry too. And equipment that people have. Instead of stringing a lot of wire, they've got these, they used to have these walkie-talkies, but now about everyone has a telephone. They can call a command post, they can call and see what's going on. Of course, that's a great improvement too. There's all this new technology. The problem is they're giving the technology to our enemies.
How did your service and experiences affect your life?
Well, it's made me appreciate living in this country, the biggest thing. I have 4 children and 7 grandchildren, and I told people, supposing I didn't live through World War II, there'd be 10 or 11 Americans that would have never been born if I didn't go. And just multiply that by the number of men that were killed and didn't come back and marry and have families. Just think of the number of Americans that would have been born if they'd have come home. That's and you appreciate the fact that you lived and was able to serve your country and hopefully could serve it as much as you can as long as you live. And one method we're doing that is, there's just like your interview. I appreciate the fact that the younger generation, like you college people, are interviewing veterans to get their feelings on the war and on our country. And I appreciate that. And I've been to a couple of places where we go to high schools, and the high school children interview us and ask us questions, and they're becoming aware now of what a priceless gift that we have living in a free country like this.
Is there anything you would like to add that we haven't covered in the interview?
No, I don't think there's anything. I think we've covered it pretty well. And as I said, I appreciate you taking the time and effort to interview me.
And we thank you for sharing your recollections with us.